Hey, Rebel Bankers, this is your host, Chris Noggle, and welcome back to the Real Estate Money School. I've got one heck of an episode for you, one that's not only timely, but one that will help you really navigate what's going on in the real estate world today. And my guest today is none other than Eddie Speed from Note School. If you haven't heard of Eddie Speed, then you're probably living under a rock somewhere because he's been around a while. He's one of the leading experts in doing notes and also the creative finance space, which we're going to get into. And he's also sought out after, a lot of people seek out Eddie for his market research and what he does. But before we get into Eddie's story and a lot of unbelievable knowledge, let's talk about all of you. Let's talk about your journey to becoming a Rebel Banker. Now, I know that all of you are on some path to success. And that path involves you getting knowledge. That's why you're here listening to this episode. But the person that came up with knowledge is power missed the most important piece, because knowledge isn't really power. The power comes from the application of the knowledge you get. So what I'm going to urge each and every one of you to do is to take something out of today's episode with Eddie Speed and Note School to really take action on. Because without the action, this is just a filler for you. This is just kind of wasted time. I need you to take this and run with it. But I'm going to give you a challenge, folks. I want to see how good you are at taking knowledge. So I want to give you something for free. If you go to chrisnoggle.com, I will give you either one of my books, The Private Money Guide or Mapping Out the Millionaire Mystery, for free. All you do is just one swipe on the index finger, look for free book, click it, and we'll mail you a copy of the book. And that right there is how you take action. So let's jump right into this. Eddie Speed, thank you for joining me on the Real Estate Money School.
How are you, Chris?
I'm doing wonderful, and I'm honored to have you on the show. You're a legend in what you do, and I'm very excited because I'll tell you what, there's a lot of real estate investors out there struggling to get deals, and I know you can help them. So let's start with just tell everybody a little bit about what you do with Note School and a little bit about your history, and then let's dive right in after that.
Well, I don't want to scare your audience, but I started doing this in 1980. That makes me an old guy.
I'm not that young. So to me, I'm like, all right, great.
So, I started as a young guy, 20 years old, and I was originally introduced into the business. At that time, interest rates were really, really high. So people created seller financing as a necessity to be able to buy a property and have an affordable payment. In other words, you could write the interest rate on a seller finance note that was way below the market interest rate. That made it an affordable payment. Looking back, tens of thousands of deals, years and years of doing it, what that really meant was seller financing or creative financing filled a gap the conventional market didn't fill, right? And so if you look forward, so 20 years later, around 2000, I'd bought tens of thousands of notes. I was a fairly well-known guy, probably as good as anybody out there in the seller finance space. And we bought non-performing notes and all these other things. But the truth be told, I wanted to go use an educational platform to show people the business so they could chase smart business, and I may have a chance of doing some business with them. Or if people aren't chasing smart business and you have the money to go buy some business they create, then they're not going to meet the standard that they really need to meet. So that's why I started training around 2000, and we called it Note School. So we just have tried to fill gaps in the market. You can imagine in 2008 to about 2015, we trained lots of people, hundreds, probably thousands, to go buy non-performing notes that did it real successfully, right? And then, the non-performing inventory kind of went away. And then there was this next market opportunity. A couple of things we figured out. 2 or 3 years ago, some of your old buddies, I was doing some training for them and masterminds and that kind of thing. And they said, Eddie, the biggest problem our folks are having is they're making more offers. Their conversion rate is lower. They're making more offers to get one deal bought. And they said, why don't you do some of that voodoo math stuff you do and show them how to structure a deal where they don't have to pay all cash. And of course, Chris, I like, we structure this deal or this deal. So, like, think in terms of this, Chris. There's cash and there's monopoly money. Which would you rather buy a property with?
Monopoly money.
You got it, right? So what does that mean? It's money that's not real cash today. It's think in terms of you could buy a property on today's price, but pay for it out in the future over time. Then you probably could structure a deal either by renting it, lease option, or turn around and wrap seller finance it. You probably could get paid for the property before you ever had to pay the money you owed for the property, right? And the seller would carry terms. I know this from buying seller finance notes for 40 years now. The seller would carry terms that you couldn't quite wrap your mind around. I mean, they would carry very lucrative terms if you could answer one question for them. Can you pay my price? And so if you could do that, then all of a sudden you just changed your game and you just took yourself away from the competition. Because you and I know, and I would say safely, of the top 500 house buyers in the business, at least 40 or 50% of them have been to a 3-day class with me in the last couple of years, right?
I know most of them.
They're not applying these strategies well unless they go down the road with us because they love it. They see it. They're smart enough. I mean, they all get it. But what a lot of your listeners may not realize is they're saying, well, I'm not the guy that buys 150 houses a year. And Eddie thinks that I can go do this. And a guy that buys 150 houses a year can do it. No, actually, I think the opposite. I think there is a terrific opportunity for the small, nimble operator to go apply this to their business. And Chris, even go partner with the big guys that do more volume than you. Because this is the one thing that their team is not applying well. That's how I see the market.
I love it. And, that is exactly right. And right now, I mean, you nailed it. People can get their price for their property. So, I know a lot of my colleagues and people that are making the offers, direct mail, all the different ways of getting deals, but they have to buy the property under price. And the sellers, they have lots of options. It's a seller's market. They can get their price. So what you're saying is give them their price, but your terms. And that is incredibly powerful because now all of a sudden, for all the real estate investors listening to this, you now have a method, which you're going to learn about in just a moment, to go and get the properties that you want, pay the price that they want, but you control the terms, which is, I think you nailed it when you were talking about dollars, right? Like I'm holding $100 bill here. And for anyone that's listening at it, this $100 is worth the most today. It will never be worth more than it is right now. The government keeps printing money, which keeps bringing this dollar down. Why wouldn't we want to pay for property and assets with weaker dollars later? And that's exactly what you're talking about. And you know what? It's exactly what the US government does and the Federal Reserve does. They want inflation because they want to pay their debt back with weaker dollars later. So you're literally doing the exact same thing as the big guys over there in the Reserve and in the US government, just doing it in a very unique way. So let's dive into that because people need a little bit more to understand and wrap their head around on how do they do this? What are the rules of engagement and how does this differ from their traditional way of doing business?
All right. So Chris, let's just say that you had a property, and I'm going to use a nice round number. I know this in most markets is too cheap, but let's just say that you had a house that was worth $100,000, just so we have a nice round number, right? Well, if it's worth $100,000, and the analogy I'm going to use is really simple. So don't think that it doesn't apply if they have a loan on it or if they have, this is just the simplest way to get your mind thinking down the road. They own it free and clear. So what is their equity? Well,
100,000.
Theoretically, if they sold it at retail, it's 100,000. If they sold it to you, Chris, they'd get probably around 78,000, right? You don't pay them the full amount of the equity because you did what?
Negotiated.
You bought it at a cash price, quick sale, discount today. We can close quickly, right? Pay cash. And all of a sudden, they didn't have to list it. They didn't have to go through it. And let's be fair about it. Most of the time when somebody's selling you a property, there's some reason why they didn't just call a realtor and sell it to the realtor. Now, that doesn't mean it's trashed. It could mean a lot of other things, but there's some reason it fit more of the real estate cash buyer than it did going and listing it through a Keller Williams agent, right? Now, let's take your customer and you offer him $78,000. You work the offer, and at some point, the odds of a harvest on this deal become pretty identifiable as a low percentage shot or maybe a no percentage shot. So then so I'm not telling you not to make that offer and that strategy. Then you go back to the guy and say, look, I've got a plan B. I work with some people that really help me do this. And what they are finance experts. And they structure deals where you could get really the full amount of your equity for your property, or maybe 95% of your equity, whatever you felt like was the appropriate conversation. If you took your equity over time. If you took your equity over time versus all the money today, would that be of interest because you can get the price you want? Now, let's go back to the conversation you and I had before we started. If you identified everybody that owns a single family house today, property owners live in the house, property owners that rent the house, the guy that is bleeding the most, way more than anybody else, is the small-time landlord.
You're absolutely correct. I'm one of them. We all of our rights, all of our ability to do the things that we bought that property for the most part, are either on hold or have been taken from us. And you said something, about that is why wouldn't somebody just list that property on the market? Well, most realtors will not take a listing if they can't show the unit. Well, if you've got a tenant that is holding all the power in your property and they don't want to show your unit, you can't list it.
Exactly. So when that guy bought the house, now you're not really a small-time landlord. Small-time landlord, according to like Urban Institute, is a guy that owns 5 units or less. You're a bigger operator than that. Okay. 75. Oh, by the way, you know how many properties that is? 17 million.
That's plenty.
That's 72% of all the rent houses.
Wow.
Okay. So he owns 17 million rent houses, 3/4 of them self-manage. So guess what? Amazingly, the hobbyist landlord that owns 1 or 2 or 3 houses doesn't have all the systems in place that the clothiers do down in Memphis Invest. Not a shocker, huh? So they may have disliked their rental before the virus. They hate their rental now. Okay. So you're worried though, Chris. I know you're not really worried, but figuratively, you're worried if you're going to make this offer. Oh my God, well, I can't get in the house either. And I got a house that's not producing income. Let me just tell you something. I can write into the loan documents that the seller carries for me an exception that no bank or mortgage company would never agree to. I can say I don't start making payments until I get payments. I can even put a reserve clause in there that if something is trashed, I can even reduce the amount I owe them because that was an unknown variable and I had to rely on certain information. In other words, I can safety up the deal in the way that I write the terms of the financing. Now, people have a struggle with that because they're thinking, well, I'm used to borrowing money at the bank or a mortgage company, and they would never let me do that. Of course they wouldn't. But seller financing is where 2 parties get together, the buyer and the seller. And they can agree to specific terms and conditions that is not standard to the banking industry. But what is seller financing? It's kind of substandard, not substandard. It's abnormal lending, right? And you can agree to things. So now all of a sudden, you just became a problem solver to a guy with the biggest pain in the market. In fact, as you know, I'm involved with a lot of people that drive marketing campaigns, like that drive marketing campaigns for even other real estate investors, right? And I'm giving them data, constantly giving them data facts that said, well, let's just say this. According to Adam, big research group, right? The small-time landlord is owed, are you ready for this?
Yeah.
$90 billion in back rent.
Oh, but there must be some government program that's going to bail those landlords out, right?
Yeah, and just less than a month ago, the Wall Street Journal did an article that said that the government program that put out $25 billion cannot get the money put out for back rent, for landlords to get back rent. You think this hobbyist landlord is going to maneuver all the way through to go get that government money? Or do you think a professional landlord that manages apartment complexes and manages hundreds of apartment complexes, you think he's going to figure out how to get the money first?
Yeah, because he's got a team that's going to figure it out for him.
Exactly. I mean, look at all the people that didn't know how to get a PPM loan, and people like you and I knew exactly how to get a PPM loan.
Correct.
Right? We're networked, we're connected, we're in masterminds that like give us the step process of exactly how to go execute this. And the small time operator that just was not in a network, he wasn't connected in a group. They didn't know how to do it. And the truth of the matter is we saw this over and over and over. The big companies, we saw them get PPM loans. That became a big problem, right? Companies had 500 employees all of a sudden qualified for a PPM loan, and there was a lot of political pressure over that. So the idea is this. If you're a real estate investor and you find a deal that everything would match up, the seller likes you, you like the seller, you like the property, there's all kind of ways you could monetize it and make money with the property once you owned it, and you hit the wall on price, then just know you tried one single strategy to buy that property, which was paying cash at a discount. What about a plan B?
Everybody should have a plan B, but very few people do because they fail at plan A and they're just like, oh, guess that wasn't going to work out. But if they just said, well, actually, I loved your way. I work with a group of, very smart people that work in the private, creative financing space, and we can probably give you the price you want for your house. What do you think if we could come up with the right terms? We will give you a full price and we'll both make out on this deal. Is that something you'd be interested in talking about? I can tell you that if someone came to me, because I'm a landlord, yeah, maybe I don't fit the criteria of the small landlord, but I'm struggling with some of our rentals. We can't get paid. We can't evict. We can't do anything. So if somebody came to me and positioned that, I'd be all ears. Matter of fact, I'd be eager to call them back to hear what are these terms? Is it advantageous? And one thing I'd be looking at as well, if you were to pay me my price today, I'm going to have a taxable gain. But now, if we're going to structure this deal out where I'm getting paid over time, well, hey, you know what? Uncle Sam, who keeps raising my taxes, might not be able to take all their money at once because you're allowing me to defer that over some time, but yet I still get my price. I'd be all ears.
Great tax advantage. Installment sales method, right? You take the income as you collect the money. And so, and so there's all of these advantages. This is not, the concept is super simple, right? Now, obviously we have Note School to go give people specific case study examples. You could do it this way, or you could do it this way. In other words, not to be confusing, but there's a good many different ways you could do this, right? But the idea is, am I leaving deals undone? In other words, how big is my closed files to my trash can files? And could I saw into my trash can files and go find deals that otherwise I could go rescue? And so this is what we do. I mean, we've taught a lot of real estate investors of all sizes. Sometimes you think, well, it's really cool. You get to go train all these super high, and I do, right? And it is cool. But the truth of the matter is, sometimes they're so big, they have a hard time applying this to their business, where a small guy is more nimble.
I can see
so
that.
maybe some of your listeners that are the smaller operators don't realize it, but they actually have an advantage.
And another neat thing about what you're talking about with creative finance, another thing that the small investor or the newer investor struggles with is always capital. The biggest barrier to entry in real estate has and always probably will be, I don't have the resources to do this. I don't have the money to go in and start buying real estate. I mean, these guys must all be really well capitalized or come from wealthy families. I don't, so real estate's not my thing. Your solution here with this creative financing doesn't just mean that you can give them full price. It also means you're not coming up with much money out of pocket. So that whole resource thing that we thought was a big roadblock now becomes you're being resourceful. And I always tell people it's not about your actual resources. It's about how resourceful you can be. That's what you're teaching people. You're teaching them how to be resourceful and how to solve somebody else's problem. A very wise man once told me, he said directly to me, he said, if you want to be wildly successful in your business. I'm like, yeah, that's what I want. Yeah. He said, you just got to do one thing. It's so simple. So pay attention. I said, I'm ready to write. Go ahead. And he says, solve other people's problems. And I wrote it down. I'm like, yeah, okay. What? He said, that's it. That's all you need to do. If you find a way to solve other people's problems, to help them get what they want, you will have everything you ever want in life. And that's all you need to do. What you're talking about is a very unique way, a not so well-known way either, to literally go out and solve a whole lot of people's problems right now in a very strange dynamic of the market. I mean, right now, these are strange times. The stock market's railing at ridiculous prices. Eventually, sometime that's going to blow up. The real estate market's following very closely back and railing, bubbles everywhere, huge increases in prices. And hey, it's a seller's market, which is not always advantageous for real estate investors, but you have a way to solve all of those sellers or soon to be sellers problem, because all sellers know, wow, my house is worth more now than it ever will be. Honey, we should probably sell. Or that landlord that's saying, I'm so sick of this. I got better things to do with my time. I can't collect rent. Honey, we just need to sell. You hold the golden ticket to solving their problem.
Yeah. And here's another interesting fact, right? So you buy this house and you buy it under very favorable terms, right? I would say that, Chris, probably 85% of the time, you would not have to make any cash down payment. Now, we don't know what we don't know until we see it, right? So these are techniques that we teach, how to avoid down payment, right? And so there's various ways that we show people how to maneuver that. Let's just assume for a minute that I'm going to buy this house and I'm going to get the seller to agree to maybe no interest forever or no interest for a period of time, or certainly below market interest rates. Okay. And we know statistically they'll do this. So let's just pretend for a moment that I gave them their price. I was sort of foolish. I overpaid, right? Not really, because of how I bought it. And now all of a sudden I owe money. I've probably written it into the agreement that I don't owe them money in time, now collecting money. And once again, now all of a sudden they just handed their problem from them to me. Problem solver. That's what you said, right?
Right.
So how am I going to monetize it? Now I could rent it. I could do lease option. I'm not saying those are never options, but let me talk about the current market conditions on the mortgage side. Yes, real estate is on fire. Yes, everything you've read about multiple offers and, a shortage of listings, all of that is 1,000% true. But did you know that right now that about 35% of the people that could get a mortgage prior to the virus can't get a mortgage now? It's a mortgage credit crunch. And the average down payment that somebody is paying to get a conventional mortgage, believe it or not, is right at 20%.
Wow.
Depending on which stats you read, it's 21, it's 19% down. So let me just tell you something. What if you could resell a property and get 20% down when you resold it, yet you didn't pay anything down when you bought it?
That sounds pretty darn good.
That's transactional income, right, up front. And then let's say you could lend the money at, say, 6 or 7%, which is a market rate, by the way, for what's called a non-qualified mortgage, a non-QM loan. About 25% of every mortgage out there today is written under those standards. So not everybody gets Fannie Mae rates, right? So if you could lend the money at, call it 6%, and you borrowed the money at 1%, aren't you running your own bank?
BYOB, my hat. So those who are listening says BYOB, and that doesn't stand for what you think. It stands for be your own banker. Exactly what you're talking about.
So now all of a sudden people start really realizing, oh my gosh, I had a very seasoned guy. You would know this guy really well. He runs marketing for about 600 real estate investors. He lives in the Atlanta area. I bet you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
And I was just with him a couple of days ago, and we were progressing. I've known him a long time, and he says, so Eddie, your vehicle is to use real estate to build your own bank. I said, isn't that what Warren Buffett said he built Nebraska Furniture for? He built Nebraska Furniture to sell furniture so he could be in the finance business. I look at real estate as a great vehicle, but particularly in today's market, let's be fair about it, Chris. We're, like people that are drinking the Kool-Aid that the houses are going to grow to the sky, that could be a little bit of Kool-Aid.
Lots of sugar added, I'll tell you that much.
And so understand that, but if I'm selling it to really qualified people that really yesterday were super good and could get a conventional mortgage, today they can't, self-employed, proof of income, just different little quirks that they're not now can't get a loan for, not because they have bad credit and always a sad story, right? And then they're paying me this inordinate down payment, then I'm their bank of the future. And I can wake up and make transactional money today and an income over 20 or 30 years on a deal that I don't have to go find. It's just mailbox money. That's why I like this.
Well, I've never met a single person, especially a real estate investor, that didn't like walking out to their mailbox to collect checks every single month. It is, and you literally, I don't want to say you created it out of thin air, but you created it out of being creative and out of being resourceful. And what you said is your negotiation on the first part of the deal, you're giving that seller exactly what they want. You're solving their problem. You're then in turn solving somebody else's problem that has the inability to get the house they want with the financing that most people would traditionally go to, because banks definitely have tightened up. And a lot of people don't understand that, but the government, the government will pay banks on money that's sitting in their reserves. That never used to be the case. Banks would take your deposits and they had to lend it out. That's how they made money. Banks no longer have to do that. The Fed screwed up, and now the Fed pays them interest on the money when it's not being lent out. So why would the bank go out there and lend on anything other than A++ paper? They wouldn't. So the average person that could get a mortgage, I'm just trying to sum up why we have this problem now. The average person that normally could get a mortgage after COVID, no way. If you're self-employed, 1099 income, I don't care if you make $1 million in 1099 income, good luck getting that mortgage. You might think, oh, I make a ton of money. I can buy any house I want, until you apply for the mortgage and you say, you got to have that W-2 income. Well, no, but I got all these 1099s. I'm self-employed. We can't give you the mortgage. Well, I'm sorry.
And the mortgage industry is not in the same position as the real estate industry. The real estate industry, if your house goes up in value 20%, you make 20% more profit. Mm-hmm. The bank makes a loan, and their way that they're going to make money is just to collect the interest they've charged. So the good loans are good, but here's the reality: 9% of every residential mortgage right now is not making a payment. That's higher than it was in 2011.
Wow. And you do a lot of this market research. I bet you know a lot of other scary fact data points that we probably should know. I mean, if you want to drip any of those out, feel free. I think the audience would love that.
Well, it's the iceberg concept, right? We have the iceberg that we can see that's above the water, which is real estate's on fire, right? Mm-hmm. And there's a shortage of listings, and there's multiple offers that overlist when you put a property out there. Those are all true factual statements, right? But the biggest risk in the mortgage industry right now, quite honestly, is with the loan servicers. Loan servicers signed agreements after 2008 and promised the bondholders that they would make payments to them even if they weren't collecting payments. Okay? And more scary than that, they also are by law, because of the law Dodd-Frank, if they're collecting escrows, they have to make taxes and insurance payments on behalf of the borrower on a loan that they're not getting paid on. So this now has been going on. It's been getting worse and worse and worse. Okay. This now has been going on since last May. Okay. So here we are, a year later. And just to give you a frame of reference, Chris, to scare the crap out of you, it's $1 billion a week.
Wow. How is it? That's not even sustainable. It's not even sustainable in the short term.
If you're in the mortgage banking business like I am on the other side of my business, and we're not doing that because the loans we have are not agency loans. They're not Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, FHA loans. So we don't deal in that product. But 70% of the mortgages that have been originated are that product. They're called GSEs, government-sponsored enterprises. And so those loans, that when they sold those loans in the bond markets, they agreed to these terms. And so when you're looking at why in the mortgage industry, why don't they see how good real estate is, and why are they tightening up their underwriting and stuff? The mortgage industry they're dealing with some tough times, and we're not sure what's going to happen. I'm not making some public statement that I think all loan servicers are going to crash. I'm not saying that at all. Not at all. But I am saying to you that they are definitely feeling a high squeeze.
Yeah, I was not aware of that. I knew that there was some issues as to why they were tightening up. I had no idea that was actually going on, but it makes all the sense in the world. I mean, there's a lot of people that aren't paying their mortgage. I mean, a lot of people are like, oh, look at how much money people are spending. They're buying cars, they're buying all these gadgets, new phones, new computers. Oh, that's not all just because of the stimulus checks.
Yeah, folks. They hadn't made their rent or mortgage.
Exactly. They're not paying their rent. They're not paying.
They got some extra income. Come on.
So pay your mortgage or go buy that fancy new Tesla Model 3. Well, let's get the Tesla Model 3 instead of the mortgage payment. Who cares? The government said we don't have to pay our mortgage right now. Listen, folks, I love that you mentioned the iceberg. We only see the top. There's a big, big problem forming underneath the water right now that we can't see.
And let me do a disclaimer. We're not saying people haven't been hurt. We're not saying there aren't a lot of people justified in not making their rent or their mortgage. Anybody can use common sense here and say, clearly, do you think there's been abuses? Yes, of course there's been abuses. We don't know what percent those abuses are. Is it 15%? Is it 20%? It's probably not 5%, and it's probably not 50%. But anyway, there are people that are in a strain. 3% of residential mortgages are in a legal agreement they don't have to pay. That's called a forbearance. It's a legal agreement between them and the lender. And so it's a timeout, right? You time out and you don't have to pay. That's called forbearance. That's only 3%. But wait a minute, Eddie, you said there's 9% of people that aren't paying. Correct. Twice the amount of loans in forbearance are in default, and they're not in forbearance. So I hear a lot of people talking about forbearance. I don't hear a lot of people talking about default. So let me give you a frame of reference, Chris, if this doesn't blow your mind. In the top 30 cities, 17.5% of every FHA loan is delinquent.
What constitutes delinquency? How many months of non-payment?
It's a 30, but
Okay.
It seriously delinquent is loans are entered into. So call it about 70% of every delinquent loan is past that 90-day period. So there's say 30% in the 0 to 90 days delinquent. And then there's 75% that are in the 90 plus delinquency, which is enters into kind of a classification in the mortgage industry of calling it seriously delinquent.
Yeah.
And so understand it's the statistics are there. Like in all of FHA, not the top 30 markets. The top 30 markets are worse than the average nationwide, but nationwide, about 14% of every FHA loan is not paying.
Now, Eddie, let's put this into a little reference for those of us old enough to remember the Great Recession of 2008, because that was a complete collapse almost of the financial industry or the financial world and real estate. So back then, what were the delinquency numbers, when we were going into 2008 and 9?
We saw residential loans in the worst of the market, about 12% weren't paying.
So we're 9 now, and we were 12 back in the Great Recession.
Yeah. And
nobody sees a problem with this?
Well, I mean, once again, it's like I've been doing this 40 years, right? I bought 50,000 transactions, right? I've run in a circle that of people that are scrape data. They have millions and billions of dollars invested. I don't know anybody right now that thinks they've got this figured out. If they do, I kind of think they're a fool. Because the truth of the matter is, in my career, and there's people clearly older than me, and there's people that scrape data better than we do and all that. I watch the real estate economist, well-known guys. They're not talking about the negative. They are talking about the positive because the positive is so good. And I'm fully acknowledging the positive is crazy, right? But yet, I've never seen anything on one side of the market so good and another side of the market so scary. And I don't know where this is going to land. I'm not saying that we shouldn't be in the market. This is a reason that we should be in the market. Right now, I believe that I've identified gaps in the market, landlords, lack of conventional lending. Everywhere I've identified a negative, I've identified a way to make an opportunity out of the negative factor in the market. So I don't think I don't think we're in a bad state. We definitely are in a weird state. So, actually he's partners with your old buddy Kent Clothier in a business. There's a guy named Chris Richter, super smart guy. If you know Chris, he's like
I know of him.
List guy in the United States. And I was recently at a mastermind and he was presenting he said, who's drinking your milkshake, right? If you know Chris, he's kind of a character. And so that was the name of his presentation. He was saying to the big real estate investors, who's buying your property that you're not buying? And it wasn't the guy like you that now owns a couple of dozen rentals. It was the guy that owned one rental or no rentals yet. It was totally the rookie that is dominating buying in the market. It's not the guy that already had 6 units or 10 units. It's the guy that didn't know yet. In other words, let's just be fair about it. He doesn't know the market rules. And he is the guy that's buying this dream of you better buy now or you'll never be able to buy as far as rentals go. And if you bought a rental today, how in the heck are you going to make this thing cash flow? Right?
Listen, I've been running the numbers. I'm not buying openly. I say that. I'm not buying right now. I'm selling. But I run the numbers on what they're paying for my properties that I'm selling. And I can't see how they're making the numbers work, to be quite frank.
And in fact, I have an interesting strategy that we teach. I'm going to offer your guys a book. It's about 50 pages. It's not super long. It's got about 6 chapters, but it has an intro that sets the stage and about 5 chapters that take specific examples of structuring deals in different ways and shows you how you could apply that to today's market. So one of the strategies in one of those chapters is called a piggyback second, where you owe the money on the property, but you don't have any interest and you have no payments. It's just a lump sum of money that's due out in the future. And this would be a really cool way to sell a rent house to one of these new landlords, because it saws off the debt service. He could pay the premium price, but he doesn't have debt service on all the money he paid, or didn't have to pay interest on it, or doesn't have to amortize it. So it's a way that you can kind of pay like over market and live with it.
That's amazing. And you're going to give my audience that book?
I am, and I'm actually going to give them a little workshop, where we're going to go through this. Because if we've done anything in this process today, we've said, here's an opportunity. Now, all of a sudden, what do they say? Well, okay, how do I seize the opportunity?
Absolutely.
How do I take advantage of it? Like, what does this mean? I mean, Eddie can't say a sentence or two and teach me creative financing. He can explain the concept. So that's what we think is the right thing to do, is to give them a book that doesn't take some, 2-day commitment to read, but they're like, oh my gosh, I hadn't quite looked at that angle. And so it's meant to be concise, to kind of pop ideas in real estate investors' head of how could I utilize this.
Oh, I love that. And that is, folks listening, that is exactly what I mentioned earlier about knowledge. You just got a whole bunch of knowledge, ways to solve other people's problems, give them their price, but yet still profit tremendously on future dollars and use that to your advantage. And now what Eddie just gave you is the ability to now actually apply that knowledge in a very easy manner, 50-page book. And you had mentioned a workshop, which I'm sure we're going to hear a little bit about. But folks, listen, if you don't see value in this, then you're obviously not in the real estate game, because I see tremendous value. I'm out there in the market seeing this, trying to make sense of how people are buying properties and making the numbers work. But what Eddie's teaching is a completely different method that enables you to pay people what they want on your terms, and everybody wins. It's problem solving 101, folks. And this is how you become wealthy. So please take advantage of this and apply this knowledge. So Eddie, how would they go about getting this book?
So it's going to be noteschool.com, the little slash mark, right? Get started. Noteschool.com/get started / or whatever people want to call it, right?
Yep.
And so there'll be an ebook, and I named the book. I kind of stole the idea from the baseball movie Moneyball.
I love that movie. I just watched that movie the other day. It's a great one.
The idea is this guy, Billy Beane, who was the manager of the Oakland A's, had the second lowest paid team in baseball, and he goes and whoops up on the Yankees, right? Well, how do you do that? Because he couldn't outpay the Yankees. But what he could do is he ran statistics and figured out things about his players that other people weren't paying attention to. The punchline is this. I'm looking at the same real estate market that everybody else is looking at. I'm not reading any different news as far as the good of the market and the price factor. What I'm doing is I'm looking at it through another set of eyes to see how to find the opportunity in the middle of the deals that I believe most people are passing. And of course, how did I figure this out? Well, it's just been a journey. It's been a long journey. And so one market cycle, you remember I started in a market cycle of the 80s in interest rates, and then 1986, and after that in Texas, more banks and savings loans went broke than they did. Only more was in the Great Depression of the 30s. And then, 9/11, and then 2008. So I've seen these cycles. No cycle looks exactly the same. People ask me all the time, is this thing we're headed for like 2008? And I'm like, I would be foolish to make some statement it absolutely is, but I will tell you this, that this last push that we've had since the virus has been in effect, and this shortage of listings and this inordinate escalation in values, that has probably made me more nervous than any single thing.
Eddie, you know what made me nervous? Me and my wife were driving around. We have an 11-month-old, and sometimes we just go on drives to get her to sleep. And we're driving through all these neighborhoods that I haven't driven through because they didn't exist a year ago. And these are all big developments with these massive houses going up, $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 houses. I'm in Buffalo, New York. This is not an expensive market. And there is house after house after house going up. For sale sign, for sale sign, for sale sign. And I'm looking at this, and, to the average naked eye, they're like, oh, wow, this is great. The market's exploding. To me, I take a flashback to 2006 and 2007 when the identical thing was happening. And I remember driving through the exact same neighborhoods back then that I'm driving through right now. I'm not saying that it's going to happen the same way, but boy, oh boy, it's eerie that there's a lot of the same similarities and a lot of the same risky driving going on out there right now that there was back then. And the other thing that scares me even more than anything, I'm a history buff and I'm a nerd when it comes to studying patterns. 1926, 27, 28, and 29 is unbelievably similar to what is happening today. So you take all those and you put them in a blender with a little bit of that .com thing, with the FANG guys, and I don't know what you got. You got yourself a milkshake that I don't know, I'm going to let somebody else drink.
Well, and once again, I started in a market that was weird, right? And interest rates were 20%. So whether you entered in the market 10 years ago or you entered in it 3 years ago or you just entered into it, like, let me just say that the reason I do all this data and give all these data facts is so that people can make an informed decision. One last thing, Chris, I would say to you, that just to put the icing on the cake you just baked, right? FOMO. They say the number one factor that is driving pricing of residential properties is the fear of missing out.
Euphoria. Absolutely. I talk about it every day in every training I'm doing. It's the reason the stock market's doing what it's doing. It's the reason GameStop went up to $500 and still today sits at $169. That's insane. GameStop is a $20 stock in its best day, and it's now $169, and people are still buying it. FOMO, baby, FOMO.
Crazy.
It is crazy. Eddie, this has been an unbelievable episode. And folks, I want to go back to what Eddie said. So he just laid out the way for you to literally go out there, solve people's problems, and make a lot of money doing it the right way. And by giving people their price, you got a much better shot of actually going into this market and getting into it, where a lot of people don't know how to. And he laid it all out to you conceptually, but he also gave you the ability to take action. Noteschool.com/get started. He's going to send you a 50-page ebook. If you don't take advantage of this, then you're either driving in a very, very busy traffic situation, and we understand in that case. But other than that, write it down, noteschool.com/get started. Get the ebook. Get into the webinar to learn this, because folks, this is the best shot you got right here. This strategy will work in today's market. And Eddie just laid it out on exactly how. And you know what? We didn't have time to go into the next phase of where he was creating those notes. We didn't even get into that. And that right there, that cake, boy, that's a really good cake to eat. And folks, if you want more of that, you got to get in there, get around the campfire, and check out what Eddie's doing. Eddie, thank you so very much. This was a phenomenal episode, and I can't wait for my audience to really start taking action on it.
That's great. So glad to be here, Chris. Thank you.
Awesome. For all of you folks, this is your journey to becoming a rebel banker. We talked about being your own bank. We talked about real estate. Now is the time for all of you to go out there and really take some serious action on what you just heard. So folks, have a great day, and we'll see you on the next episode of the Real Estate Money School. Thanks for joining.